Welcome to the KuppingerCole Analyst Chat. I'm your host. My name is Matthias Reinwarth. I'm an analyst and advisor at KuppingerCole Analysts. Like in every edition, I will have one guest joining me, often a fellow analyst or another interesting partner, and we will have a 15-minute or so chat around current topics. And my guest today is John Tolbert from Seattle. Hi, John.
Hi, Matthias.
Great to have you again. And as I said, we are talking about current topics. And this is really true for now. We had an episode together about fraud reduction intelligence platforms earlier. And today we have to talk about some really current cases of fraud that's just going on during the pandemic crisis in the US, right?
Yes. Unfortunately, fraudsters have found new and innovative ways to exploit the pandemic crisis. So using fraud reduction intelligence platforms has become a real paramount issue for a variety of different kinds of organizations, including, as we've read in the news here recently, state unemployment agencies. There's been a large amount of attempted fraud against various U.S. states and their unemployment agencies by foreign fraudsters who are attempting to create new accounts at the unemployment agencies to collect unemployment benefits from U.S. states. I'm here in Seattle area, Washington, and we've been particularly hard hit in this state by this kind of a scam. And really the problem that they've experienced is that all it's taken to create an account at the unemployment agency is really just a name, physical address, and social security number. And unfortunately, a lot of that information has been breached from many different sources over the years and has been available on the dark web. So the fraudsters take these bits of information and use them to assemble accounts. And in the case, here of state unemployment fraud, they take those 3 data points, create an account, and then assign a bank account, outside the state, where they can then go collect that unemployment benefit. So we see this as a variation on what many call new account fraud or synthetic fraud. And a lot of this information that has been previously leaked from data breaches, like email addresses, phone numbers, names, physical address, social security number, date of birth, are used to build these kinds of accounts.
Yeah, I've just been notified by this great site, Have I Been Owned, about recent data breaches. And when you just look at the mere numbers, 69 million breached accounts in the last, if I remember correctly. Of course, this is information that can be easily reused for targeting such systems for new account fraud.
Yeah, oftentimes people, I think, associate fraud mostly against banks or other kinds of financial institutions. But, in these cases where the bad guys are trying to create new accounts, they'll use records from healthcare. That's why healthcare agencies, doctors' offices, clinics, whatnot, have been so heavily attacked over the last year or two, because they're unfortunately a really good source of this particular kind of PII, including social security numbers here in the U.S. Insurance accounts generally are tied to a person's social security number. Same thing with, government agencies, school records, and employment records. So what wouldn't necessarily seem like a vector for financial fraud, all this PII can be used to build these new fake accounts, which then is used for financial fraud. We see mule accounts, setting up new credit cards, lines of credits, but then also, like this recent case in the U.S. around unemployment fraud, they use this to create a brand new account and try to collect benefits from the state.
Right. So they are now harvesting what they gathered before and use it for the second step. So first gather the information and then really use it for this fraudulent method.
Yeah, a lot of the information might be a little bit harder to get a hold of, but once the fraudsters have it in their hands, it can be more lucrative, unfortunately, than just say stealing credit card numbers that might have a fairly low per transaction limit, or might, a lot of credit card companies are pretty good at detecting fraud and denying it. So again, the malicious actors here have found a weaker site to attack. But there are ways around this, or ways to prevent this. We look at the mitigation, such as bot intelligence. Sometimes these things are perpetrated by different kinds of bots. And then really at the heart of it all is identity vetting. I think in the case of unemployment fraud, fraudsters, if they're in possession of just those three fairly easy to get data points, could create accounts. State agencies should rely on more stringent forms of identity vetting. And we can talk about that more in a minute as well.
Right, but if this information that is used for really creating these accounts or for claiming unemployment is that easily available, there's almost the duty to apply identity vetting when it's that easy. And if there's so much information about different people around due to recent data breaches, I would expect that this should be the standard there.
Yeah, states have to make it much harder in order to file claims than simply showing up with a social security number. I mean, it's such a well-known, easily compromised bit of information. It should not have the value that it does, unfortunately.
Okay, I got it. And I assume, at least in the EU and in Germany, the healthcare system and hospitals especially are typically attacked because their security is due to limited budgets, due to limited resources, and because it's not their focus, their security often is rather weak, and they get rather frequently hit by such breaches and attacks. Is this true for the states as well?
Yes, I would say so. I think financial industry does a much better job on the whole of protecting identity, and then also they have better cybersecurity posture than healthcare of all different flavors. Whether it's on the clinic or the doctor's office's side, or on the health insurance side as well. It's not nearly as rigorous a process for obtaining accounts, registering, and authentication as it should be. And we know that there are much better methods for identity vetting, and then stronger multi-factor authentication that could help reduce the risk that healthcare companies and agencies are exposed to.
In the earlier episode, when we talked about this fraud reduction intelligence platforms, we were rather talking very theoretically. Unfortunately, you have better, more practical and real-life examples to share with us now, right?
Yeah, we've been collecting information about COVID-19 related fraud scams. And I've just put together about a dozen different kinds of scams.
Wow.
Right now. In biotech researcher account takeovers, there have been several cases where companies are being phished to get credentials of researchers. Early on in the beginning stages of the pandemic crisis, we saw huge numbers of registrations for coronavirus-related domains, which are then used along with fake emails that really look like they're coming from the World Health Organization or the CDC in the U.S. They would create, a malicious document, or try to get victims to go to a malicious link. And the idea would be to get them there, take over their computer, or capture their credentials so that they can be used in other kinds of fraud. There's been password spraying against healthcare workers. Not just against their corporate accounts, but also their personal accounts. Same thing about healthcare non-governmental organizations have been attacked both on the corporate and personal side. intelligence agencies. It seems that everybody's always spying against everybody else, but there's been a significant uptick reported in various state actors trying to collect information about what others know, especially regarding COVID-19. Stimulus scams, another example, what we were just talking about with unemployment agencies, but when the stimulus checks were coming out in the U.S., there were numerous scams around trying to get that benefit from the intended recipient, and they used everything from email, text, phishing, voice phishing to get that government aid.
That sounds scary.
Yeah, it's scary and sad all at the same time that people would try to manipulate a real global crisis for fraud.
Right, but there's even more.
Yeah, it's people have to be on guard for this. We've seen more phishing, reverse phishing. Send somebody an email or a text, make it look like it's coming from a bank or a utility about a late payment. Because as we've seen too, many people are unemployed as a result of the crisis. So they craft an email or a text that looks like it's coming from some kind of service provider and saying you've got a late payment. Click this link. It takes you to a malicious site. People put their credentials in, and then the bad guys have those credentials. This is particularly problematic with SMS because there are URL shorteners in use. So even if somebody's trying to be a little bit more on top of the situation, it can be hard to tell what the link is within SMS.
Right, and these are often shortened, and so they are almost used to it, to clicking on that link when it comes from their telco or whatever.
Yeah, and as a result of security awareness training over the years, many employees are kind of on guard against phishing emails, but it's been less common over text until the last few months. Same thing with the voice calls, or sending an email and then asking someone to call a number where fraudsters are on the other end of the line. Many twists and variations in how this is happening these days.
Right. More examples from your side?
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly run through the list here. So phishing unemployed people with fake job offers. Again, maybe direct them to a site, have them enter some credentials, hope that those credentials are, reusing emails and passwords. Fraudulent charitable campaigns, collect money, PII, get shares on social media. This one's been really rampant. Fake medical supply sites. People, bad actors are sending out spam email about low cost masks or test kits, and then people will order them and then not get what they're intending to order. There are pretty sophisticated work from home charity scams, mule accounts in use. The idea there is, somebody's out of work. Do you want to be able to work from home? Sign up here. The malicious actor will tell the person, oh, you need to go get a Bitcoin account. We'll transfer money in Bitcoin. We want you to move that Bitcoin into another account for us. It's really just money laundering. So it's a way of perpetrating fraud and preying on people who are looking for a work from home opportunity. And then lastly, lots and lots of coronavirus and political disinformation campaigns. And as we've seen multiple studies over the last few years, it seems that disinformation spreads easier and faster than information.
Oh yeah, this I can confirm here as well, right?
Yeah.
So what to do against that? What are the methods to prevent that from happening?
Well, just focusing back on the, let's say, the unemployment fraud or the other government aid fraud kinds of cases, I think there are, as we covered in the last session and in the Fraud Reduction Intelligence Platform's Leadership Compass, there are about 6 major techniques that vendors can utilize to reduce different kinds of fraud. But really, I just want to focus on identity proofing here. I think in the case of unemployment fraud, requiring more than 3 bits of information to be able to assemble account and receive benefits is absolutely necessary. So identity proofing is really at the heart of it, validating a person in their request against authoritative documents in order to establish a digital account of one kind or another. Really, being able to tie this back to, let's say, a passport, a driver's license number, or some other authoritative document, whether it be EIDs in Europe or something like that. It has to be more than something that can be easily phished or gotten from the dark web to assemble accounts. I would say that implementing identity proofing as part of an overall fraud reduction strategy should be a paramount concern for government agencies as well as any other financial or healthcare institution at this time. Identity proofing plus multi-factor authentication can significantly reduce the amount of fraud that can be enacted against these kinds of agencies and organizations.
And it should be in the interest of the organization or the governments themselves, because actually we have 2 victims here. On the one hand, the payment is made by the government in that case, and the actual person behind the stolen credentials also is a victim, because they have to prove that they actually did not, for example, apply for unemployment here.
Exactly. It's a loss on the part of the taxpayers, as you're saying. The government agency loses money, but then it's a huge hassle for the victims of identity theft. And if somebody loses those 3 bits of information, including a social security number, then they can be used elsewhere. And there's a lot of work that an individual has to do to be able to clear their record at that point.
Okay, so what else can be done when it comes to identity proofing?
Well, it's kind of a more advanced use case, but I have seen several instances where vendors have created pretty interesting and in most cases secure mobile applications that allow for identity vetting, especially for like financial use cases. In this case, it would take, a user would take their phone, be able to take a picture of either a driver's license or a passport photo, take a selfie, compare those, maybe read the magnetic strip or use an NFC to, get the information out of the physical passport, and then tie those bits of information together at the time of account registration. So that, there are a few mobile apps by a few vendors that can do this. And I think, the technology is around, it works, it's just not widely deployed yet. And I think this too could be a really good way of helping to reduce fraud. Especially in times like a pandemic where it's not as easy to say go in person and register, show the documents, and have close contact in order to be able to do that. I think mobile solutions are definitely something that both government agencies and other kinds of private sector businesses should be looking at to do identity proofing remotely.
Right. And although there is still some kind of social gap to be able to actually have a smartphone to run a mobile app, I think that is really more and more getting common to almost every citizen of the US to be able to use such a mechanism, more or less.
Well, you've got a really good point there. One of the drawbacks to technical solutions is making the assumption that everybody has the latest smartphone. So, this would work for a certain percentage of the population, but it doesn't work for everybody. So you still have to make accommodations for those that that may not have a capable smartphone. I mean, even older model smartphones won't necessarily allow you to do all the sophisticated things that are required, let's say, for a remote identity proofing use case.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that might still be an issue, and the solutions that a government agency has to provide needs to cover all use cases, so to cover the full population of a state.
Well, yeah, and even in the U.S., I think it's somewhere under 30% of people have a passport, and then not everyone has a driver's license either. So there's going to be a certain segment of the population that do not have these two particular authoritative documents that they could use for identity proofing. But there are other options, non-drivers identity documents that generally can be had. But what do you do when you're in a case like now where you can't go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and get a brand new driver's license without some difficulty, and that also varies state by state at this point.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's difficult to believe that it's 2020, but yes, I fully see the problem. And the same is true for the UK also, where there's no ID card at all.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, thank you, John, that you presented such an insight into current things that are happening, although they are actually sad and tragic for those involved. But it's good to see that the work that we're doing has really to do something with the real life and real threats, and that we might support in preventing people from falling victim to that, and to help organizations to be prepared to help their customers/citizens here. And you mentioned the Leadership Compass already. What else can we as KuppingerCole provide to them, to interested parties as help?
Yeah, I would say government agencies or other organizations that need help selecting fraud reduction intelligence, if they don't have it, definitely get it. Take a look at the Leadership Compass on fraud reduction intelligence platforms. We have a couple of webinars that are out there also that were done sort of after the Leadership Compass. And then, yeah, in general, if people have questions, feel free to contact us. We would definitely be willing to help point agencies or companies in the right direction when they're looking for some help with reducing fraud.
Yes, I can just confirm this. That is true for the US team, and that is true, of course, for the EU team of KuppingerCole and around the world, also in APAC. So just get in touch with us at KuppingerCole.com, and please let us know if we can be of support, and at least try to fetch the Leadership Compass, maybe even with a 30-day free test account. Just make sure that we make the situation a bit safer here. So thank you, John, for telling us your insight and your experiences from what's going on right now in the US.
Thanks, Matthias.
And thanks to the audience for listening, and stay safe, stay secure, and stay vigilant when it comes to phishing and all these mechanisms that you described, John. So looking forward to the next episode, hopefully with better news. Thanks again, John. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.